Hey everyone, Kelly Dean Allen here with you once again. So then, haven't updated this series of tutorials in a couple of weeks, so I figured that it was time to get back at it, this time with a classic track from 1972. Now, for 72's tutorial, I decided to go with one of my favorite Black Sabbath tracks, Snowblind, from the band's Volume 4 album, released in, you guessed it, 1972. Now, this was the era of Sabbath wherein Tony Iommi was seriously down-tuning his guitar to C sharp in order to ease up the pain and tension on his damaged right hand fretting fingers when he was bending notes and whatnot. It also had the added benefit of making his guitar tone sound incredibly heavy and doom-laden, giving us that sound and tone that we all know and love from this era of Sabbath. Regardless, just a stellar track from Volume 4, one of its best and one of Sabbath's most underrated tracks. Let's close in here a little bit and learn how to play it, shall we? Alright then, Snowblind, Tony Iommi, Black Sabbath from 1972's Volume 4. Like I said, we are in C sharp tuning, so we're tuned down quite substantially here, 3 semitones. Here's your tuning. Very careful when you're holding like a lot of the chords and power chords that we're going to be using here, because the strings are so floppy, right? So you really need to keep your fingers steady. Any kind of movement whatsoever will pull you right out of pitch. So we are dealing with basically 4 riffs here throughout this track. We have the opening riff, we have the verse riff, we have the chorus riff, if this song actually had a chorus, which it doesn't, it's all verses, but I'm calling this riff the chorus riff, where the chorus would be, and then there's this riff near the end of the track that just kind of comes out of nowhere, right? Very typical of early Black Sabbath. And there's also a bridge, and there's a couple of guitar solos to deal with as well. But the intro riff we'll get to first, and it goes a little something like this. That right there, all power chords, 2-finger power chords, starting with an E power chord, all downstrokes. We're going to hit this, move it up 2 spots to F sharp, move it up 1 spot to G, back it off to D, and then back into E again, just on the A and D string. Kind of like that, right? E, F sharp, G, D, E. And then you're going to slide out of that E right off to an open A string. And then you're going to drop into a regular old C cowboy chord, right? And then just arpeggiate the top 5 strings down and back up again. Back up to the D string, right? Then you're going to drop into a regular D chord, do the same thing, but with a double hit on the high E string. And then back up to the G string. And then repeat. Right, and that is the intro riff, and we're going to come back to that actually. And then we're into the verse riff. That right there, which we're going to be repeating 6 times, twice before the vocals come in, and then 4 more times during the first verse. More power chords, just an E power chord. We're going to hit this twice, and then you're going to lift your index off of that 7 and back on again, right back into the E power chord. Right, and then you're going to go off to a D power chord, but you're going to start on the open A this time, and then drop into the D power chord, hit it twice. Then we're going to play this little lick, just sliding 5 into 7 of the A string, catching the open G on the upstroke, right? If you catch a little bit of the D string along with that, right, fine. Tony does that himself a couple of times. Right, that is the verse riff repeated 6 times. And then, like I said, we drop into the chorus riff if this song actually had a chorus, but I'm calling this the chorus riff. Goes a little something like this. You repeat it twice. So we're hammering on 5 on the 7 of the A string along with the open E, kind of like that, right? And then 3 single notes, 5 off to 4 of the A, up to 5 of the low E. Right? And then we're going to go into 7 of the low E and slide out of it very quickly. Right? Right off to an open A, and then we're going to drop into C again. But this time we're only going to arpeggiate the 4 middle strings and just going down, right? And then we drop into D immediately, and we're just going to arpeggiate the D string, G string, and B string of this D chord. And repeat. Right back to the verse riff. 6 more times. Back into the chorus riff. Twice. Back to the intro riff. Twice. Right, and then we're into the bridge. I'm going to kill my gain here just a little bit and my volume for this bridge. Quiet section of the song. We're using basic power chord shapes here, but with the top 3 strings open. So we're starting with an E power chord, 7 of the A, 9 of the D, but the open top 3 strings. And we're just going to arpeggiate down and back up the top 5 strings. Then we're going to back it up to D, but we're just going to arpeggiate the 4 middle strings and just going down. So we're hanging in this E for 1 bar, right? But we're only going to be in the D for half a bar before moving off to C sharp. Now this is the only time we're changing the chord shape. So when we go off to C sharp, we're backing our pinky up to the 5 of the D, right? Holding the 4 of the A. Right? Odd little chord there. It's coming out of that D. And then we're going to take that 4 of the A, move it off to 3, and now we're in a C. And then again, once we get into C, we're going to arpeggiate down and back up, and then we're going to move it back 1 more spot, and again, down and back up. So starting in E, D, C sharp, C, and repeat. Right, I still have too much gain. Let's kill that a little bit here. And that is the bridge, and you're going to repeat that like 8 times or something like that, and it's going to continue because the solo is going to go on over top of that. So let's have a look at this solo now. It goes a little something like this. Let's just slow it down and play through it. And that is the solo right there. E minor pentatonic for the most part. We get into the blues scale a little bit as well. Starting on 12 onto 15 of the B string right into 4 full step bends. Picking each one. The 4th bend you're going to let hang there and give it some vibrato. right? And then we're going to rake into the 12th fret of the high E and basically go up the blues scale. Kind of like that, right? 12 and then 15 off to 12 of the B, 15, 14, 12 of the G. Right? And then coming off that 12 of the G, we're going to drop onto 14 of the D and immediately slide it back to 7 of the D. And then off to 5, right? Right? And then the next section of the solo is all going to go on here on the 5s and 7s of the A and the D string. I'm not going to break it apart fret by fret, note by note. However, we are repeating the same pattern twice, right? So I'm going to just play through it slowly a couple of times, but from the beginning. Right? And then we're into this. On that 5 of the D. So like I said, we're repeating the same pattern twice. However, the very first time kick starts with this. With a hammer on from 5 to 7 of the A and then 5, 7 of the D into 2 bends. Now, the next section we're going to repeat twice. Repeat it. Starting with a bend on that 7, releasing off to 5. And then grabbing the 7 of the A, right? Right, and that is that section of the solo. So let's go through that nice and slow, and then we'll move on. Now that's the first lick. You're only repeating that one once, right at the beginning, right? And now we start the first of 2 repeating licks. Now repeat. That 5 of the D. Now we're back in this box again with some unison bends, 12 of the high E, 15 of the B, 4. Kind of like that, right? And then again, we're going to rake into that 12 and go up the blues scale. Right off to that 12 of the G, right? However, this time we're going to come off that 12 of the G onto 15 of the high E right into a full step bend. Back to the natural note off to 12, right into a full step bend on that 15 of the B, right? And then you're going to rebend that, release it off to 12, right? Same thing on the G string from 14 off to 12, and then finish on the 14 of the D and slide out of it. Right, kind of like that. And that's the solo, the main solo. And let's take it from the top nice and slow, and then we'll move on. Unison bends. Right, and that is the solo right there. Right back into the verse riff. 6 times again. And so that's the third verse, and then we drop back into the chorus riff. right? And at this point, we drop into that oddball riff that kind of comes out of nowhere and goes something like this. And we're repeating that a whole bunch of times, like 8 times. 7th fret of the A string. Then you're just going to drop onto the 10 with your pinky, hit it twice, pull it back off to 7. And you repeat that like 3 times, right? The 3rd time coming off that 10, you're going to drop into an E power chord and very quickly back it off to D and hit it twice. Kind of like that, and repeat. I think we're kind of doing double hits. The first time you do a single hit on that 7, and then every other time it's a double hit. And then grab that E, back it up to D, hit it a couple of times, and repeat, right? Right? After you repeat that a whole bunch of times, we drop back into the chorus riff. Right back into the verse riff again for the final time, for the final verse. After the final verse, that is going to continue, and then there is the outro solo over top of that. Not going to get too heavily into the outro solo here, as I didn't actually learn it, and it's not the most iconic of Tony Iommi solos, but I'm going to give you a ballpark of what he's doing, right? So he drops initially into more unison bends again. It's just a lot of trills and unison bends, right, and blues licks, right? Just here on the 12, 15, right? And then he does a whole bunch of trills there between 12 and 15, right, on the B and high E. Right, more unison bends. More trills, right? Then he drops off to a unison bend here, 7 and 10, right? Hits that a couple of times, and then he ascends it, moves it up 3 spots, and then up 2 more spots back to the original position. Right, kind of like that, more trills. Right, and then he kind of goes up the pentatonic. Little licks like that, right, and he drops into this classic blues lick. Just bending the 14 of the G, 12 on the 15 of the B. Right, kind of double times it. Right, kind of like that, right. More unison bends, more trills, right? Gets into a big full step bend there on the 15, that kind of stuff, right? Great outro solo here to improvise over near the end of this track. Nothing easier to improvise over than E minor pentatonic, right? And there you go. That is how you play Snowblind by Tony Iommi and Black Sabbath. Certainly hope you enjoyed that, found it helpful. If you did, please hit that like button right down there. Maybe drop me a subscribe if you haven't done that already, as that would be very kind. Hope you're well out there in your little guitar corner of the world, wherever that may find you, and we will see you next time. Cheers.